What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, January 26, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials and keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now then, Donald Trump is just setting an absolutely amazing pace in his first few days in office. I mean, tomorrow is just 1 week since the inauguration, and he's already bringing about all these changes. And it may be that he's trying to get all of his agenda moving forward so quickly so that his obstructionists in Congress don't know what to do and can't react in a timely manner to it. Now, Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, is out there saying that Donald Trump has raised the question of what the heck was every other president was doing during their first weeks in office. Were they even trying? When you look at the degree of activity that's coming on out of the White House, Trump, whether you agree with what he's doing or not, he's obviously doing the job. And it does make it look like some of these other presidents were just there to enjoy the adulation and their place in history and so forth and so on. But it is an amazing amount of work, and a lot of things are getting done, and some we agree with and some we don't. But there's no question he's definitely being an activist president here. We're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a quick phone call. Dean in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm still pinching myself from some of the headlines yesterday. Let me read you the top 5 headlines that were on Reuters yesterday. Trump moves ahead with the wall. Trump expected to order a temporary ban on refugees. Trump administration tells EPA to cut climate page from website. Top 10 U.S. sanctuary cities face over $2 billion in cuts by Trump policy. And Trump preparing executive orders to reduce U.S. role in the UN.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah, I mean they're all pretty much good things. I have mixed feelings about the UN one. Partly because, well, we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. I think the UN has failed completely. Everyone, is talking about how angry they are that the UN passed this Security Council resolution condemning the illegal settlements in Israel. Well, they should have been doing that all along. And the shock isn't that they finally actually did something about one of their rogue member nations. The real scandal is that it took this long to get it done.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. And the only other topic I was going to bring up now is with all the liberal friends and the millennials on Facebook right now, the big topic with restricting anyone's supposed hate speech with this Nazi guy getting punched in the face. I mean, the millennials just have such a disconnect right now with what it means to protect minority speech, and it's just getting real frustrating. But, California's standing strong right now. There's a lot of us standing together and changing a lot of attitudes. We're able to get a lot of people to vote for Trump this election, based on a lot of the ideas that even Ron Paul had pushed originally for economic change.
Yes.
And it's been very encouraging. So thanks a bunch. Keep up the good work. And I wanted to say, too, we're looking forward to a GoFundMe page to get you back here to the mainland.
Well, I'd like to avoid doing that. I mean, I am certainly hoping, with 2017 shaping up to be the year of the rise of the independent media, I'm hoping to be approached by some larger organization who will help us with the moving expenses. To be very honest, I'm tired of doing everything pretty much myself, running the webmaster, doing the server, doing the security, doing the chasing of advertisers and everything, and I'm ready to be part of a larger organization. So that I can focus primarily on content and commentary and analysis and not have to deal with some of this other stuff. But we'll see what's going to happen there. And I know that Claire certainly wants to get back to the mainland. It's very, very frustrating for her here. First, finding singers for the demo work of her original music, and second, there are all kinds of music conferences and everything on the mainland that she'd like to attend, which are prohibitively expensive from here in Hawaii. And also for me, I get invited to speak at all kinds of symposiums and conferences and conventions, but they rarely have the money necessary to fly me out here from Hawaii. In fact, the last one that did was that 10th anniversary 9/11 symposium in New York, which we really enjoyed. Yeah, we'd like to get back to the mainland here. I mean, you know, we've been here almost 20 years, and you know, you've seen one hula girl, you've seen them all, and at my age, I don't notice them much anymore. So, yeah, we'd like to get back to the mainland, but we're hoping to find somebody, a business venture who's seeking to acquire me, as it were.
Well, we're all rooting for you, Mike. So the prophecy came true. So all praise be to Keck.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to let you go and switch over to Bob in Las Vegas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Thank you for that fantastic interview with Wayne Madsen. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, a lot of people wrote in about that. They're looking at the scale of the CIA and how many businesses they're involved in, and it's not a pretty picture here, because certainly any business that's part of the CIA is enjoying advantages over other businesses just being run by law-abiding American citizens.
Absolutely. You know what, Mike, I have to tell you, as always, your delivery, everything, you're such a polished broadcaster, and Trump would be very lucky to have you on his new network if it should come to pass. Mike, there's also another book about the CIA. I don't know if you've heard of Douglas Valentine's book, The CIA is Organized Crime.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. There have been a lot of books about the CIA over the years, and it's been very difficult for them to get out, because anybody who's actually connected with the CIA signs an agreement that all books will be subject to CIA censorship before publication. But some of the really good ones are like The Puzzle Palace, for those who are interested in the earlier history of the CIA and what they've been up to. But there's a lot of information out there about what they're doing, and frankly, the one time that they were openly communicating with me at CBS Television City, I was frankly not impressed. They came across as mafia thugs wrapped in the American flag, except for this one individual, and I don't remember his name, but he was very Toastmaster, polished, nice suit, and very formal in his presentation. But the rest of them...
What do you make... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What do you make of... I mean, I love what Trump's been doing on the domestic front. Can't complain. I'm very happy, but a little worried about this discussion of safe zones in Syria.
Yeah.
And I just read an article on RT. It's basically one of the few websites that I go to for my news. And they were talking about Qatar all of a sudden is so concerned about the Syrian civilians, the very same civilians that their terrorists have been killing these past 5 years. But there's been talk about a no-fly zone. Why a no-fly zone? ISIS and Al-Qaeda don't have an air force the last time I checked.
Well,
so I don't know why there would be a no-fly zone.
Well, see, here Donald Trump, I think, has made his first foreign policy misstep. First of all, the American president does not have the authority to go in and declare safe spaces or anything else in other people's countries. Right. And second of all, the United States has not been invited into Syria to help deal with the refugee crisis there. So it also, unfortunately, undermines one of Trump's campaign promises, which was that this era of foreign interventions into foreign countries was going to end under his administration. And so it strikes me as kind of a reckless thing to do, and certainly Russia's not in agreement with this. Syria is not in agreement with this, but it's another attempt to sell a military intervention, and the American people are not going to go for it, because we've been down this humanitarian crisis road before, and we know it's all a joke. The previous administration created the humanitarian crisis and then offered to sell us a solution in exchange for our support for a war. So I think it was a bad mistake. I think People are going to start wondering if Trump is going to start breaking some of his other campaign promises. And again, it is a pointless escalation. Now, I know we all applaud Donald Trump closing the borders, but these refugees, instead of just moving to another halfway house sort of situation, let's send them back to their homes. Because if Trump is going to keep his word and wind all these Mideast wars down that are sponsored by the United States government, then these people are probably going to want to go home. Actually, a lot of the refugees in Europe have, in fact, already gone home, because Europe has not turned out to be the wonderful thing they were promised. They weren't being given free homes and free cars and the rest of it. So that really is the ultimate solution, is let's get all these people back to where they came from, where their lives are. But I think this is Donald Trump's first serious misstep on foreign policy.
I'm just, I'm also puzzled by his drumbeat, his constant repeating of keeping the oil in Iraq. I mean, Mr. President, that oil belongs to the Iraqi people. I don't recall the Iraqi people inviting the American soldiers, the American army, in to invade their country. So that belongs to the Iraqi people. They had no say in what the U.S. military was going to do in terms of their invasion of Iraq. So why should the U.S. or any other country steal Iraqi oil? That belongs to the Iraqi people.
Well, it does,
so,
but the reason for the Iraqi war wasn't necessarily gaining access to Iraq's oil, but determining what currency that oil would be traded in. And that was an essential part of propping up the U.S. economy ever since Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility. It was called the petrodollar deal, and it is a scheme to maintain foreign demand and use of the U.S. dollar in order to trade in vital natural resources, not just oil, but other strategic metals and so forth. And as General Wesley Clark revealed, this whole plan of all these wars all across the Middle East was about locking all of these oil-producing nations to the U.S. dollar, because without that prop-up, the U.S. dollar is going to collapse. Now, if we can get our manufacturing back online and we can get back to healthy, GMO-free agricultural exports, then we're not going to be dependent on that petrodollar deal, and we can get out of this mess without an economic collapse.
Yeah, I mean, he just sounds like TR. He sounds like Teddy Roosevelt, blatantly imperialistic. We're going to go into these countries and steal their resources, even though that wasn't the objective of the war. He just wants to go in there and say, you know what, we lost 5,000 soldiers. We're going to take the oil as compensation, and it's just very arrogant. I'm really disgusted when I hear him say that.
Well,
and then,
yeah, he's proving himself to be a very rash individual, which is unfortunately a characteristic we sometimes see with populist leaders. But I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail, because the American people, as much as they support Donald Trump, the American people are just tired of wars. And they're definitely not going to support that. Donald Trump has inherited the skepticism created by his predecessors, and he'd better recognize and acknowledge that and tone down some of the rhetoric before more and more people start to say he really is no better than his predecessors. Because that's what he's got to get out there to the American people, that he really is different, or he is going to lose in 2020.
Exactly. I agree. I just want to say this, going back to Syria. Syria is a special case because, one, you have the Zionists who want Assad out because of his support of Hezbollah and breaking that Shia arc. And two, you have that Syria will serve the purpose of shipping Qatari or Saudi oil, gas to Europe, and thus weaken Russia, even though Russia in the end will probably ship more of their energy resources east. But it's a very special case. That's why the deep state, they have a real, they just can't lose their attention towards Syria. Well,
you're missing one other factor. Israel's basically taking over the Golan Heights, even though technically it is occupied territory. And they don't own the oil under it, but they're basically stealing Syria's oil, and then they had the chutzpah to demand that Assad allow a pipeline be built across Syria so that Israel could sell that stolen oil to Europe, and Assad said no, and that is a major part of Israel's desire to get Assad out.
I just think that Trump, maybe he's being forced. We don't know what's going on in the background. He's being forced by the deep state to make certain concessions to them. And one of those concessions might be Syria. In order for him to get the rest of his agenda passed.
Well, it may be. There's a lot of bargaining going on in the background, but again, if the U.S. goes into Syria, we're risking outright war with Russia, and that's going to be bad news no matter who's in the White House. So I think he needs to tone it down. I think we need to see who's putting these ideas into his head. Again, as he gets a little further into the job, we do have to give him his first 100 days. And he gets a little further into the job, we need to look for signs that maybe he's starting to modify his opinion. Now, as you know, during the campaign trail, he was out there talking about, yes, it's okay to torture all these suspected terrorists and so forth. But after his discussions with some of his advisors, he's now pulling back on that and saying, you know, I'm being told by my advisors torture really doesn't work. It's not like you see on TV and movies. And that may be the reason that the New York Slimes and the Washington Compost came up with this supposed draft executive order reactivating the CIA's black sites, which the White House is saying, no, that did not come from the White House. That is some kind of a fraud out there.
Right. Well, and I'm also a little disappointed that Putin and Trump have not spoken yet. I haven't heard of any conversation between the two.
Well, they supposedly there's a lot of phone calls going on.
Yeah, I mean, since he took over, since he became president officially,
you know, he's been a little busy this last week here. So you know,
yeah, for sure.
Again, well, let's see what happens over the first 100 days. But at this point,
thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Trump is definitely showing his impulsive, rash side, which can be successful in business. It's not necessarily a quality I'm comfortable with seeing in that Oval Office. But again, he's new to the job and needs a little time for seasoning, if you will. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Francis in Vancouver, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You're just hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to mention a couple things. First of all, there's some very good news, and that's that InfoWars has been given White House press credentials.
Yes. Yes, and apparently Alex Jones is going to be on one of those Skype channels that they're setting up. And by the way, did you notice in Sean Spicer's first White House press conference, the first questions went to the people in the back of the room, not the big heavyweight corporate media people in the front row. He basically just passed them by.
And Associated Press had a big tantrum over it, too. Because they're used for going back hundreds and hundreds of news conferences. Associated Press always gets to be the first to get a question asked. And they flipped out and they figured that was their royal privilege or something. And when it went, it might have even gone to Breitbart, they really had a tantrum over that.
Well, I understand that, and the corporate media is having a tantrum. I think the CNN president was way out of line with his implied threat that if Trump doesn't start playing ball with the corporate media, that CNN could actually trigger a Mideast war for him. And we're going to have to be on the guard against that. And the corporate media needs a good dose of humble. Okay?
That Zucker guy is saying crazy stuff. One other thing I'd like to mention is with one of the concerns with Trump was that he's going to be just like taking, I think, $2 trillion out of the taxes. And everyone's asking, where's the money going to come from? But back around 1999, I used to read all of Pat Buchanan's excellent books, like A Republic, Not an Empire.
Yes.
And he got into this, and he always talked about the fact that, say, between the end of the Civil War and the creation of the Federal Reserve and the IRS, that the U.S. got all of its revenue from tariffs.
Yes.
And it actually ran embarrassing surpluses. And now I see that Grover Norquist, who's he's head of Americans for Tax Reform and the creator of the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, he's saying that if Trump is going to come in and declare 30% tariffs, that this will more than balance out the loss in in taxes that Trump is proposing.
Well, it's a case of who ultimately is going to pay for it. We need to let you go and take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the first thing I want to do is a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who rejoined our network, and I was a little late getting to that, so we've taken care of that. Now, the problem with a tariff is that it's a zero-sum game. If instead of raising taxes, you impose tariffs, well, you may save money on the taxes, but you're going to pay higher prices at the store for whatever you're buying. Now, that's not entirely a negative thing because it does shift the burden of funding the government onto those who are more able to pay it. And so that may not be a necessarily bad thing. And certainly tariffs on all imports are going to stimulate domestic production and domestic jobs. So that, too, is also going to work. In the end, though, the problem that Donald Trump is facing with regard to the economy is that the government doesn't have any money to do anything with. It either has to raise taxes or it has to borrow more. And I think Donald Trump is probably going to go down the road of borrowing more until he realizes something a little bit more dramatic is required, like simply writing off the debt, taking control of the private central bank the way Putin did, and starting to run the public currency as a public utility. Now then, getting on back to the White House press corps, ABC scored the first Oval Office interview with President Trump, and they issued this draconian list of requirements for anybody who's using their footage. Has to have the ABC News bugs. There has to be a verbal announcement from ABC News, have to show the banner and everything, which is rather amazing because it's almost like ABC thinks they own the words of the President of the United States of America. And it was a little bit arrogant, and it rubbed people the wrong way on that one. Now, interestingly enough, we're talking about the Hegelian dialectic, where the U.S. government creates a mess, and then it says, oh, there's a mess, we need your money and your children to fix it. And somebody actually came up with another way of describing this. This is from Global Research up in Canada. They're calling it political Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And, you know, it actually fits. It actually does fit. Now, Munchausen syndrome, for those who are not familiar with the term, are people who deliberately make themselves ill so they can garner sympathy and support from people around them. Munchausen syndrome by proxy are those who will make another member of the family sick in order to get sympathy and so forth going on. And it's a very, very horrible thing to do. So global research is calling the behavior of America's top politicians political Munchausen syndrome by proxy, to go on out into somebody else's country and create a mess and then go to the American people and say, oh, you've got to feel sorry for us, you've got to give us more of your money, you've got to give us your children to serve in these various wars and so forth and so on. We're going to take another phone call here. Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk to you about propaganda.
Yes.
As you know, we've been propagandized our whole life, and now there's a great awakening, not just here, but around the world.
Yes.
Where I'm really seeing it now is in my son's school. He comes home and tells me everything that the teachers tell him. And, for example, all throughout the election, they're telling the kids how Trump is a bad man, he's a sexist, he's a racist, he's no good, blah, 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 blah. And they had a mock election, and I am in a Democratic state, and overwhelmingly the Republicans came out. I think it was like 250 to 103, where the kids disregarded what the teacher said and went to what the parents are trying to tell the kids what is the right way and what is the wrong way. So not only the teachers are losing the battles to try to teach kids and propaganda them the way they want to, it's beginning to be a battle within the schools now.
And that's not what the schools are supposed to be before. That's not what the schools are supposed to be for. And yet the liberals have turned the education system. It's not even educating people anymore. It's just all propaganda, all indoctrination. And I understand, because I went through the public school system when I was a kid. There's always a little indoctrination in there, in particular the social studies classes, where we were taught to hate commies. Okay, but we still had a lot of time for things like math and science and chemistry and all the cool subjects. But it really just got over the top this last election year. And that's not what our public schools are supposed to be for. All right, we got to take another break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Steve. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Judicial Watch is filing another lawsuit, and this one is going to be targeting John Kerry and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And the lawsuit basically is to force the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to conduct a full-scale damage assessment of Hillary Clinton's use of an unsecure, unofficial email account for classified government business, and also to explain why it failed to do so when information about Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's use of that private email server to transmit classified information first surfaced. So Judicial Watch is still out there doing yeoman's work on getting at the bottom of all of this. And it does need to be brought out. Now, already the corporate media is trying to diffuse this situation. Over at the New York Daily News, which is very liberal, they ran a story about how Donald Trump's White House staffers have active private Republican National Committee email accounts. See, they've got private email accounts. It's no big deal. No, the big deal is simply this. Everybody in government has their own private email, and Democrats also have email addresses at the Democratic Party, and Republicans have email addresses at the Republican National Committee. The issue is that Hillary Clinton had her own weak private email server on which she was conducting official business. Now, it's perfectly okay for Trump's staff to have private email addresses as long as official government business and especially classified information is not shared over it. That is the difference. That's the issue. And the New York Daily News is trying to create a sense of equivalence, saying, well, see, Donald Trump's people are doing exactly the same thing. No, they're not. Now, apparently, the State Department's entire senior level of management resigned yesterday. Patrick Kennedy, the agency's undersecretary for management, who'd served for 9 years, since before Obama came on board, resigned unexpectedly along with 3 of his top officials. Looks like the rats are starting to get out of the ship, or the swamp is draining itself, whatever metaphor you wish to use there. Meanwhile, the federal government has launched an investigation into why the Department of Homeland Security was caught hacking into the Georgia state government network, including its election system. And by the way, it turned out 5 states were being hacked by the Department of Homeland Security. 5 states' election systems were being hacked by the Department of Homeland Security. No explanation for it whatsoever, so they're launching an investigation into that. Now, the Secret Service agent O'Grady, who went public saying that she refused to take a bullet for President Trump, is now under investigation for violating the Hatch Act. Now, the Hatch Act includes a provision which says federal employees are not allowed to engage in political activity. And O'Grady's comments are definitely in violation of that. Now, there's going to be another march on Washington, D.C. This Friday, tomorrow. This one's the March for Life, the pro-abortion activists. And like the Women's March, it's actually a thinly disguised march against President Trump, trying to keep up that drumbeat. Nobody likes him. Nobody likes him. Russia hacked the election, stole the White House for Donald Trump. Meanwhile, out in Portland, there were some liberal protesters blocking traffic with their signs about Donald Trump is this and Donald Trump is that. And the police finally decided they'd had enough, and they arrested them for obstructing traffic. And all of the drivers around them were cheering and clapping and applauding. Remember what I said the other day, that if all of these protests and demonstrations are an attempt at a color revolution here in the United States of America, it is going to fail. Because for such a color revolution, for such a Maidan to work, they must have popular support in the general population. And the way these snowflakes and buttercups have been behaving, they're not seen as sympathetic. And that incident in Portland, I think, illustrates that perfectly. All right, let's grab a couple more phone calls here. Alex in San Antonio, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I had a scenario here that I'm thinking about, and this is only because of what happens with Bitcoin and the Mexican peso that I'm kind of saying this. But I think that whole thing with the wall with Mexico is a ruse to get the Mexican oligarchy and the Mexican corrupt elite to kind of panic and kind of essentially smoke themselves out. I see the wall thing as Bush's WMDs, but in reverse, where he's mentioning the wall, and he keeps mentioning this thing that's getting the Mexican authorities all riled up, and they're showing their hand. You know what I mean? And it just in the sense that when you look at the Mexican peso and how it was devalued so quickly, and you see how much ran back into Bitcoin, and it's almost par and par, you're just like, okay, this is he's kind of smoking them out.
That may be part of what's going on, but Trump campaigned on ending the flood of illegals into this country. And they focus on hang on. They focus on the issue of the wall because that's an image everybody can get behind. The reality is that the wall is already 80% there. I think this claim that it's going to cost $3 billion is wildly inflated. And we actually don't really need a wall if we start prosecuting those who harbor and employ illegal aliens. Because if they can't come up here, if they can't get welfare payments, if they don't get free stuff, they're going to go back home. And it's going to be much more cost-effective to simply cut off the support for them on this side of the border and let them go back home here. Now, Donald Trump is claiming he wants a 20% tariff on imports from Mexico to pay for the border wall. And it sounds really good until you stop and realize Mexico will not pay that increase. That 20% tax on imports will be paid ultimately by American consumers of those imported products. And so it's not a particularly good idea. And I really do think the imagery of the wall notwithstanding, that if we would simply have the Immigrations and Customs actually do their job and be willing to prosecute those who hire and harbor illegal immigrants under the existing laws, that the problem is really going to reduce itself.
Well, Mike, I mean, I do agree with you in the sense that you don't really need a wall. Even if you put a wall there, that's not going to prevent illegal immigration. What you're saying in regards to hiring and harboring illegal immigrants, that's kind of a middle issue because we really can't determine who's doing right and who's doing wrong by that. What we really have to look at is having the Mexican government and the Latin American government all end corruption, and it all starts by putting the most corrupt people. Like you speak about the narcocracy all the time, and the narco elements in Latin America are hardly ever mentioned.
Well, here, let me cut you off here. Let me cut you off here because what's going on here? First of all, I don't think we should be intervening in Mexico's affairs any more than we should be intervening in Syria's affairs. Okay, we're dealing with the illegal immigrant problem here in the United States of America, and the most cost-effective way to do it is to simply make it economically unattractive for anybody to come across our border. And we do that by, enforcing the laws against harboring or employing illegal. Hang on, okay? We enforce the existing laws. We don't need to spend a huge amount of money on a wall because, as you say, it will be ineffective. People can tunnel underneath the walls. Okay? And then we let the Mexican people take care of the corruption of their government, just like the American people are in the process of taking care of the corruption of the American government.
But I agree with you. Well, what I'm saying is, if the Mexican officials are not taken out the way they need to be, and I believe the whole thing with El Chapo is being extradited, I think that's a big signal that, hey, if you come here and we can prove, especially to the Mexican president, where I believe wholeheartedly, because of the things that can be proven, not just through social media, but actual documents that you can download and see, I'm pretty sure that Donald Trump would not hesitate to have Peña Nieto arrested on live television or in front of the entire world's cameras, just so that he could set a precedent and he could say, hey, listen, this is what's really happening. And at the end of the day, that right there is what's going to change the consciousness in the Mexican society so that they can realize that they can end the corruption in their own country. Because I'm going to be honest with you, most people that come here, I live in Texas, and most of the shelters that are filled with illegal immigrants, they're here not because they want to be here. They're here because the cartels on the border are shooting people. So they're not here because they need to be here.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but you're not hearing what I'm saying. That's the problem for the Mexican people to solve. We have got enough problems of our own, and we need to take care of it. Anyway, the phone lines are loading up. Thank you for the phone call, Alex. We're going to take Wes in Idaho. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Greetings, Michael. Subject, Robert Kennedy heading this vaccination investigation. I guess he's better than Paul Offit to head the investigation. Paul Offit, who says children could take 1,000 vaccinations. He also has a conflict of interest that has patents on vaccinations. But Robert Kennedy, I just heard him. He's saying, paraphrase, democracy for which it stands. You think he'd know better. What is he, an attorney in political in America for years now? The second thing is he heads a Mercury project, as if eliminating mercury from vaccinations would make them hunky-dory. The third thing is...
Well, hold it. Let me respond to what you just said here. There is no question that mercury is neurotoxic. It was actually banned by the FDA in 1999. It's now 2017. Why is it still in the vaccines here? Now, I'm not saying that getting rid of the mercury is going to make all vaccines perfectly safe, because there are issues with other adjuvants as well. But it's certainly going to be a major step in dealing with the out-of-control epidemic of autism. Okay?
I am trying to point out some things that I don't think are good. The elimination of mercury would maybe help things, yes, but there's still much greater problems. The third thing is, I believe Robert Kennedy thinks that global warming is a problem, and I'm supposed to get behind this guy? I mean...
well, nobody's... hang on. Wes, okay? No two people are ever going to agree on 100% of everything. Obviously, I disagree with Robert Kennedy Jr. about global warming. And I do agree with him about the vaccines. I don't think he's saying that his agenda is only to deal with the mercury. The commission is called simply the Vaccine Safety Commission, and I'm sure they're going to be looking at all of these issues. Anyway, listen, got to let you go. Running out of time. We're going to switch over to Alan in Chicago. Aloha, Alan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, good afternoon, Mike. I just wanted to run by you and your audience, if you haven't covered it, that the White House now has an official YouTube site that's called The White House, and it has almost 1 million subscribers already in a couple of days. Okay. And it looks like what their format is official Trump speeches and White House press briefings from every day, and I think that's a positive step. I know that there's C-SPAN, but a lot of people can't get to that. And I'm also happy to hear that the new media or alternative media is starting to get into those press briefings, Mike.
Well, I'm glad to hear it too, and I wouldn't mind having a shot at one of those Skype channels myself here. I think the advantage of the White House maintaining its own YouTube channel is that this information from Donald Trump and the White House spokesman are going to get out into the public without being messed around with by the corporate media, who is clearly very, very hostile to the current administration.
I also understand that his Twitter account, I think it's his personal one, has gained almost 5 million subscribers just since the inauguration, so that's a good thing too. And I really hope that you and Claire can come back to us in the mainland. I would love to see you at some speaking engagements, and I would love, I'm putting this out, that some organization could pick you up and accommodate you and get you back here. We love you.
Well, thank you very much. And from your lips to somebody's ears, and it may well happen, but the year is still young, and you know, we'll just see what the future unfolds. Anyway, Alan, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go because I got a bunch of news I need to cover. We're coming up on the top of the hour here. Now, the Secret Service is now dealing with a video of this Instagram video showing this school teacher down in Texas, and she's in her classroom, and on the whiteboard behind her is a projected image of Donald Trump, which she is squirting at with a water pistol while she screams, "Die." And she put this out on Instagram, and yes, she's going to get a call from a visit from the Secret Service. It's not known if students were in the classroom at the time because the student area is not being shown. But I can just imagine already the screams from the liberals, we need a 15-day waiting period for water pistols. And it's clear that the liberal establishment is starting to really lose it when they do things like this. Again, they're destroying their own popular support. Now, over at CNN, Chris Cuomo was running an interview with Rick Santorum talking about Donald Trump's allegations of massive election fraud. And Chris Cuomo acknowledged that, yeah, there's some fraud, and these are legitimate questions to ask about illegals voting, dead voting, people registered in multiple states, and so forth and so on. But then came on out and declared there's absolutely no proof that there was any fraud whatsoever in last year's elections. And Rick Santorum tore him apart, and justifiably so, because CNN does not have any foundation for making that declarative statement. More about this when we come back. And aloha, welcome back to the show. And we're talking about CNN, the crumbling non-news, where Chris Cuomo was having this interview with Rick Santorum on the subject of Donald Trump's claims that Hillary Clinton did not, in fact, win the popular vote because of all the illegal immigrants who were voting, all the dead voters, all the skullduggery going on. And Chris Cuomo just came on out in defense of the system, said, you know, Donald Trump's got absolutely no proof. There's no proof any of this thing happened. It couldn't. And Chris Cuomo and CNN have no actual basis to make such a claim. Because we do know there is evidence of massive voting by non-citizens coming from TrueTheVote.org and VoteFraud.org and black box voting. And with all the states that banned voter ID, there's no basis for CNN to say it couldn't happen. It's just more propaganda from the corporate media. And as we get into this issue of the investigating the election fraud last year, the corporate media is definitely going to be on the side of the status quo because they are part of the problem. They work hand in glove with how the elections are being counted. The company that is in charge of tabulating all the election results, Voters News Service, is owned by the TV news networks and some of the influential newspapers. They're part of the problem. It doesn't matter what Trump's investigation reveals, the corporate media will never report it. So, Dan Rather is now starting his own online campaign to combat fake news. Now, if you remember, Dan Rather was a small market newscaster down in Texas, nobody'd ever heard of, And for some reason, he was chosen to be allowed to view the Zapruder film of the John F. Kennedy assassination, which was not shown to the public until Jim Garrison's trial of Clay Shaw, and then rather gets on the TV and reports that in the Zapruder film, John F. Kennedy's head rockets forward from the headshot. And, of course, once we all saw the Zapruder movie, we realized Dan Rather was lying to us, and he shot to network stardom immediately after that. And there have been a couple of other incidents in the career of Mr. Rather, so it is hypocritical and arrogant for him to be out there talking about combating fake news. Of course, what he's really combating is anybody who's daring to point out that the corporate media's stock in trade is fake news. Yet another comedy writer is in serious trouble for going after Barron Trump. Stephen Spinola is under criticism and ought to be fired, tweeting that President Trump's 10-year-old son Barron Trump is a date rapist to be. Now, folks, hands off the family. Even the mafia agrees with that one. But the corporate media seems to feel it's all fair game. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to take a phone call from Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I know there's a big controversy as to how we're going to pay for the wall. And there's a few government programs that we might be able to get rid of, if you would humor me on this.
Okay.
My favorite one is teaching monkeys to gamble, to the tune of $2.6 million.
Yeah, I remember that one. Remember when they put a fish on a treadmill, and the one where they found out, were these hookers in Thailand abusing alcohol or some such nonsense as that?
$3.2 million to give rabbits deep tissue Swedish massages. There is, I think, $4.8 million to teach sea monkeys to synchronize swim. There's a $6 million grant from the government to revamp a private high-end skiing airport for luxury patrons.
If I recall correctly, there's only one airline that actually uses that airport, too.
You are correct. You have the shrimp on the treadmill, and now you also have putting mountain lions on treadmills to the tune of, I think, $7.8 million. So, yeah, there's a little bit of fat that we could probably cut from the budget, just around the corners a little bit, to free up some funds to protect our borders and our citizens from violent drugs and rapists.
Well, there's something you need to understand there. These oddball projects that are funded, this is a form of political payback, because the various individuals involved in this have done a favor for the campaign or the candidate, and they can't be rewarded overtly. So funding grants for ridiculous projects that are going to go nowhere is a form of under-the-counter emolument to political supporters. I mean, look at how much money was being handed out for the global warming hoax.
Yeah, well, the amount of bloat in our budget. If Donald Trump does one thing, and I did a lot of research on this, going back and forth with somebody today, just the cursory research that I did, the amount of bloat that can be cut from the government is unbelievably staggering. I mean, you have whole entire departments. You could probably get rid of the National Teachers Association or the National Education Association. You could probably get rid of that at this point, because a lot of the schools are funded by their states, and their curriculum is coming from their states. The reason there's about $6 billion right there every year that you can put towards a wall. So I don't think that we should even be debating on the funding. This is an important thing that needs to be done, and I totally agree with you. I think that the majority of the wall is probably just for show and bravado. There's probably much better ways that you can secure the border. I looked into that Operation Wetback that you talked about. That seemed to be pretty effective.
Yes.
So why can't we, move forward with what works and dump all this old stuff?
Well, again, it's because of the nature of politics and political spending. And again, most of the wall is already built. And believe it or not, there's actually funds that were allocated all the way back in the George Bush presidency to do building on that wall. So I don't know where they're coming up with this $3 billion figure. But again, a much more cost-effective way of doing it, besides putting crocodiles in the Rio Grande, is to simply enforce the existing laws. And I'll give you a good example. We've got the mayor of Boston is out there saying, I'm going to defy President Bush's executive order, and I'm going to allow homeless people to sleep in City Hall. Well, that puts him in violation of Title 8, Section 1324. The harboring of illegal immigrants is a crime. Send in the police and have this guy arrested.
Yeah, well, I think it's me that people are so tolerant of a specific race, primarily Mexicans, breaking the law. I mean, if we're okay with races breaking specific laws, can we lobby maybe, Americans, white people, be able to break tax?
Oh no! You forgot your liberalologist holy commandment. White people are the cause of all the evil in the world. They've got to be crushed down under the law, and we've got to cut slack for Israel and Mexicans and Syrian refugees, and just allow them to violate the laws because they're special and privileged and need to be protected.
Well, and when you look at all the horrible things we've seen in the last week since Trump's been elected, all the violence at the inauguration, at the Women's March, all these riots, the way that people must justify this in their minds is they really must actually think that white people are some Star Wars-esque oppressive empire Nazi regime that is, kicking down doors and dragging women and children out of their homes and throwing them in the concentration camps. That's the only way that this behavior can be justified, is to say we're not exerting violence against
Kyle, let me
everyday people.
Kyle, okay. Basically, I'm opposed to anybody kicking down doors and dragging people away to concentration camps. It will look bad in the corporate media, who will be focusing on that if that turns out to be part of the immigration solution here. But the solution is really simple. Simply stop making it financially attractive for these people to come up here.
Completely agree.
That's it. That's going to be it. And the problem is going to go away.
But to have the justification for the actions of these people, they must be thinking that this is actually coming, or that there must be brown shirts walking the streets at some point dragging people out of home.
That's just something that they came up with, because what they're really pushing is this George Soros globalist New World Order, where all of the world's people are to be just blended together into one common lump without any sense of identity, without any sense of historical, cultural, or regional uniqueness, in order to make them easier to control. Anyway, Kyle, we're going to let you go. I got a bunch of news I need to get to. Thank you very much. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And I must have said something to really annoy somebody, because there's a major attack going on my server right now. So we'll just let the children have their tantrum and roll around on the floor and kick and scream and say, and they'll get over it eventually here. Now, ABC, I mean, at a time when the corporate media is out there still trying to say, we're telling you the truth, and the independent media is lying, Donald Trump is lying about the election fraud, and all the rest of it. It was a bit of an embarrassment that ABC actually had to issue some public apologies related to its coverage. And we're looking at this article that came out of the New York Daily News, in which they were saying that, this is an uphill fight by the corporate media. And yes, it is. Absolutely here. Now then, a little bit of clarification over this whole Megyn Kelly thing, where she left Fox News and went to NBC and took a significant pay cut. in the process. Don't worry, she's still making something like $15 million. And it turns out Fox News wasn't even fact-checking their internal communications, because the story, as it's coming on out from Healthy Headline, is that Megyn Kelly's issue with Fox News was primarily that it was taking up so much of her time that she couldn't work on anything else. But apparently what triggered all of this was that a Fox producer saw Megyn Kelly taking pills on the set multiple times, and he reported it to Fox executives, and Kelly was going through weight loss at the time, and Fox just assumed that one of their top media news stars was using drugs, and so they decided not to renew Kelly's contract. Here's where it gets interesting. What Megyn Kelly was actually taking on the set was Garcinia ZT, which is an over-the-counter natural supplement that helps you lose weight. So Fox News didn't even fact-check on its own internal communications here. All righty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call. Mary in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. You've been talking about coming down hard on people who hire illegals, but they tried that. I'm pretty sure they tried that back in the early 90s, because I was working as a nurse agency.
Yes.
And they were being very, very careful. And also, I fixed up houses on the side. Now, when you're doing a little business like that, you don't have vast sums of money. And I know most of these people that come in, a lot of them, many of them, come in illegal, and they get under-the-table jobs, and they're from people that are not harboring them, but...
Okay, Mary, we have in this country 90 million legal American citizens willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years, okay? And we need to take care of Americans first, okay?
I understand.
All right? And we all have to be willing to make that commitment of hiring American, buying American, if we're going to make America great again. And I'm sorry, these people in these other countries are enduring a great deal of hardship, primarily from the wars started by the U.S. government, but that doesn't obligate us to take them in at a time when our economy cannot support them.
I understand that.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand that, but I remember the hospitals come down hard on regular people, regular Americans. They were so hard. And they stand out on the corner in the morning. If you live in New Jersey or New York, I'm sure you go around the Home Depot. They come out there early. Tons of people hire them. And I know people who opened, like doctors' offices and stuff like that, who were willing to hire people under the table. A lot of little business.
Well, if we start, if we start enforcing the laws on that issue, the only way we're going to solve the illegal immigrant refugee problem is by cutting off their expected windfall from coming here, whether it's jobs and free stuff. Okay, all right, Mary, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. One thing I am very firmly on board with Donald Trump is, we as Americans owe our first allegiance and loyalty to our fellow Americans. And I know there's a lot of problems all around the world. I understand and acknowledge many of those problems have been caused by preceding administrations of the United States government. But we've got a new administration. We're just starting out here. And this administration was voted into office on the promise of making America great again. We have to make sure our people are fully employed first. As long as we have Americans who are sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash dumpsters, the government has no business sending any of our money to foreign countries, has no business opening the borders to just anybody who wants to walk on in. There is a legal path to immigration in this country. And for anybody who follows that and goes through the process, welcome. I hope we live up to your expectations. But when we're dealing with the issue of illegal immigrants, we have to remember that first word, illegal. So, anyway. Now then, getting on to foreign policy issues here. Trump is expected to sign orders for a safe zone in Syria. Now, one report said it was supposed to be dealing with the refugee crisis. Others are saying, well, it's protecting the civilians. Okay, well, if our government had really been concerned about the civilians, they wouldn't have been trying to bring down Assad for 5 years. And maybe Trump really doesn't understand why Syria is in the mess that it's in. But again, Donald Trump, as President of the United States of America, has no authority to declare portions of a foreign nation safe zones or anything else. Russia's not agreeing with this. Syria's not agreeing with this. Donald Trump is President of the United States of America. He is not the President of the entire planet. And he needs to have a rethink on this one, in my opinion. Now, somebody who seems to know what's going on over in Syria is Hawaii's own Tulsi Gabbard, who has come back from her fact-finding trip along with Dennis Kucinich. And immediately, of course, everybody's screaming, oh, she's wasting taxpayer money. She shouldn't be doing this. She should be minding her own business over there in Hawaii. And as it turns out, her fact-finding trip was privately financed. She did not, in fact, use any tax money. And so now everybody is having to look at what she's got to say. And she was interviewed on CNN and basically says, there are no moderates. All of the people over there, including the ones being supported and backed by the United States of America, are basically terrorists. And we can't call them moderates because maybe they didn't cut off quite so many heads as the other guys, but they're still cutting off heads. Now, Tulsi has talked to Assad. She's talked to ordinary people. And now she's pushing a bill in Congress that would say the United States is not allowed to fund foreign terrorist groups. We always hear the U.S. propagandists talking about, oh, this nation is a sponsor of terror. Oh, Iran is a sponsor of terror. This nation. This. The biggest state sponsor of terror on planet Earth is the United States government. All right, let's take another phone call. Alex in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, you're spot on. I was calling to tell you that I think that Trump is really misdirecting the war on terror to the wrong people. I mean, there's video of him talking about how he knows the buildings on 9/11 had bombs in them, or he thinks they did.
Yes.
But why, if that's the case, then why are you going after the propped-up boogeyman that the United States always gives us?
Well,
I'm kind of concerned about his whole war.
You remember the observation I made about Trump's dangerous degree of naivete coming into office, almost on a scale with Jimmy Carter, and how Donald Trump's opinion of Israel is based on what he has seen on corporate media. And the same thing is probably true about the war on terror. Now, Donald Trump has now had an in-your-face lesson in how deceptive and manipulative the corporate media can be, but he has not yet had that next step of going back and saying, what else have they lied about? They were lying about me, they were lying about Barron, they were lying about Melania, they were lying about Ivania. What else have they been lying about? Were they lying about 9/11? Obviously, he's suspicious about that. Have they been lying about Israel all along? He needs to ask that question. Has the corporate media been lying about the war on terror? Certainly. They were all out there screaming Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and it turned out they did not exist. The corporate media were out there screaming Assad was gassing his own supporters with sarin gas. That also was a lie. Trump needs to grow up a little bit, and he needs to do it really, really fast, or he's going to find himself being used and abused by the people around him in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I will definitely not support any of his war rhetoric and his war on terror because it's unfounded. There's no proof, just like voter election fraud when they say that he committed voter fraud. It's unfounded. Everything's unfounded. I don't know why he's biting on the hook that they put in front of him. It's kind of gross.
Well, like I said, and I said this even during the campaign, I said my one concern about Donald Trump is that he is dangerously naive about what's really going on in the world, because too much of his worldview is based on what he's been seeing in corporate media. And all of that is just a big steaming pile of USDA choice bovine excrement.
That's right. And even torture. He's come out and he said he's for torture because people told him that it works. But the thing is... Well,
he's backed off on that. He's backed off on that part.
We need fair trials. We need fair trials for anyone
the burden of proof has to be on the government. Got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're getting an update on that story about Patrick Kennedy's departure from the State Department. And the original reports were that he had resigned along with 3 of his top aides without any explanation. Now we're hearing, apparently CNN has got a different version of the story, that Patrick Kennedy and these 3 officials were told by the Trump administration they're no longer needed. And that's actually a positive thing, because Patrick Kennedy was one of the individuals at State Department that was running interference on all investigations into Hillary Clinton's private email server. And again, there is a question lurking out there on the horizon that deserves an answer. Was Hillary Clinton repeating the 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests using her weak private email server to deliver the goods, with her so-called charitable foundation collecting and laundering the payments? And remember, when that Romanian hacker, Guccifer, was prowling around her server, he reported seeing at least 10 foreign IPs logged in at the same time. All right, we're going to grab another phone call. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Mike, I think it was Tucker Carlson's show yesterday. Sat on for a few minutes, and I noticed that interview with Tulsi Gabbard and Dennis Kucinich. Some female neocon was interviewing them, trying to say, "Oh, don't you think that Assad, does terrible things to his people, and don't you think Russia? It's bad because supporting Russia and Iran, and Russia has this lease for that base there in Syria." Meanwhile, both Gabbard and Kucinich were pointing out that he's protecting Christians over there, as well as Muslims.
Yes.
Assad, and nothing like what they're making him out to be. So, what I'm hoping that it was Trump that sent him out there secretly, told him to basically go out there and give him a fact find, because he did talk to her. He did talk to Tulsi. As a matter of fact, there was some rumors going around that she might be Secretary of State earlier when he was interviewing people up at Trump Towers. So I really, I hope that he is being filled on in what's really going on in Syria. On top of that, General Flynn, if I'm not mistaken, actually was fired or told to resign, to retire, because of he knew about the gun running to so-called rebels who were really the terrorists, and he complained about it, and Obama had him fired for that, or at least pretty much forced him to resign. So I think hopefully Trump is starting to understand this, and he's going to take some kind of action, even if he's going to maybe together with Russia bomb ISIS.
Yeah, he's talking about that. He's definitely talking about coordination and cooperation with Russia to go after the actual terrorists. And but his declaration of saying, "I'm going to create safe spaces," that kind of rubbed people the wrong way. We know where all the terrorist groups are, and the terrorist groups themselves are embedding themselves with the civilians to try and deter the attacks. And there is no amount of safe space declaration Trump can do that's going to stop that behavior. But at some point, when you cut off their supplies, and with Trump now in office, the U.S. is not going to be parachuting supplies into those terrorist groups anymore. Or if the CIA continues to do so, they're acting illegally, which is no big deal for the CIA.
But that's why one of the things I wanted to point out. What Trump needs to do is, as well as bombing ISIS, I mean really ISIS now, not bombing Assad's forces, he also needs to get to the bottom of all this gun running, and these are war crimes and crimes of treason against both the people of Syria and treason against the United States. And he needs to get to the bottom of it and bring criminal charges against these people, whether it's the CIA people themselves, right up to Obama or and Hillary.
Well, one thing that is very obvious from Trump's behavior just this last week, he's definitely a take-charge kind of guy, which has also been his hallmark during his business career. And I think he's going to be very intolerant of anybody in the administration, especially the executive branch, deciding to just go out on their own and make policy decisions. And so we might actually see some heads roll over at CIA before this is all over. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Mark. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as you know, in this last ad block, we had an ad for Extendivite, and it seemed like a good time to mention that Don Wiskin will be our guest on the third hour of our February 1st show, talking about, because it's a good product. As you can see here on BAM User, I use it myself, and it's really good stuff. My wife also uses it. Now then, as I mentioned earlier in the show on one of the phone calls, President Trump has signed an order scaling back U.S. funding for the United Nations. And a lot of people are saying that this is Trump's punishing the UN for daring to pass that Security Council resolution against the Palestinian settlements, and maybe it is. Donald Trump at the moment is very pro-Israel. Apparently his father was friends with a very young Benjamin Netanyahu. But I think time is going to solve that particular problem here. But overall, given that the United Nations has been such a failure, I think maybe it's time that it be defunded. Because it certainly has not acted to reduce violence anywhere in the world. And, of course, the United Nations was one of the authors of the global warming hoax through that Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was caught lying, misrepresenting the data, right alongside all the other players in this hoax. Hadley Climate Research Unit, Penn State, Met Office, and so forth, NOAA, NASA, all of it. So it might not be a bad thing. The more centralized power gets, the more corrupt it will become, because the corruptors target centers of power. And that's something the founding fathers of this country understood, which is why they set this country up with power being spread across the entire society. All right, let's take a phone call here. Jeff in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Jeff, are you there?
No, Mike.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm here. You know, it really puzzles me how you are so educated in so many subjects, but you failed to see the Jews at the top of the Federal Reserve usury system. You failed to see
hang
the
on,
Jews lies of the Holocaust.
Hang on a second. Okay. The problem is the system of banking itself, not who is there in it. Okay? It is a crooked banking system, I will grant you. Private central banking is very crooked. It's a tool of enslavement. There's no question about that. But I don't want to be getting into saying that it's all the fault of a particular religious group, because if you go over to the Federal Reserve and you go over to Goldman Sachs and you go over to whatever, there's all kinds of people there. They're not all the same religion. They're not all the same ethnic group. And every time that you come on out there and start screaming about, oh, it's all the Jews this and the Jews that, you're handing Israel all the excuse it needs to say, oh, we have to shut down the independent media because it's all hate speech and so forth.
All that knowledge of yours.
Okay, hang on.
All that knowledge.
Okay. We're going to let you go here. And I'm going to make this very, very, very clear. We are here to talk about politics. We're here to talk about the economy. We are not here to criticize anybody's religion or ethnicity. Period. End of discussion. Now, Israel, of course, would like to shut down freedom of speech all over the world. And their favorite tool is to be able to scream, oh, they're anti-Semites. And that's why they have people like this call into these shows to start screaming about Jewish this and Jewish that. We're not going to play their games. I am very critical of private central banking. I always have been. But let's not help our enemies find a way to shut us down. Now then, getting on back to this still slim but gradually reducing possibility of war with Russia. There are some new developments coming on out. You've been hearing about how America's latest generation weapons are very expensive, bloated, things really don't work all that well. Russia, and for that matter China, tend to spend their money more wisely because the purpose of their weapons procurement programs are to come up with cost-effective weapons. And the Russians have hit on a good solution regarding battle tanks. And what they're doing is they're going to modernize the T-90, which has been modernized before. The new version is going to be called the T-90M. And what they're doing is they're backfitting many of the technologies for the T-14 Armada. Now, the Armada is a very expensive tank. But the T-90M, which is going to be mostly built from the existing fleet of T-90As, is going to be much less costly, but still an effective weapon. That's how you do it. That's how you make an efficient fighting force while being cost-effective, something the Pentagon should be looking at. But, of course, the Pentagon is all about the money. It's all about the huge contracts. It's all about ribbons and medals. And, of course, after they retire, after 20 years on a full pension, they can look forward to jobs as consultants for those very same defense contractors they've been handing these big fat contracts to. It is a corrupted system. It always has been. Eisenhower warned us about that military-industrial complex. Now, the latest surprise coming out of Russia, the MiG-35 apparently is going to be armed with a laser for air-to-air combat. And that is going to be a major game changer. Now, here in the United States, the F-35 carries a traditional cannon. The software for it is still months, if not years, away from operating. And because of the already overburdened airframe, it's only carrying enough ammunition for the gun to fire a total of 3 seconds. That's really not an effective tool. And, of course, with a laser weapon, which at air combat range is a zero time of flight weaponry, you don't need to worry about leading your target or anything. You put the pip on the target, you hit that laser. That is going to be something very, very impressive. Now, I'm opposed to war, but every once in a while somebody comes out with a really cool toy. I remember some years ago I got invited to go out on, basically it was a PR cruise on one of the Arleigh Burkes, and I got to visit the sonar area, and that was really cool. Probably because I spent so much time working audio for my wife's music and everything. I thought that was the coolest part of the entire ship. Now, here's an interesting story. This is coming on out of Investment Watch blog, and this is a good example of political theater, where Democrats have been screeching about how dangerous it was to hand Donald Trump the keys to the nuclear weapons, and they're trying to pass a bill that would make it illegal for the president to launch a first strike without the approval of Congress. And that may not be that optimal, dealing with a crisis situation. But in any event, Donald Trump, or for that matter, Hillary Clinton, cannot launch a first strike on their own. The current U.S. nuclear policy has what is called the two-man rule, in which after the president gives the order for a first strike launch, it has to be confirmed by another acknowledged member of the National Command Authority. The president isn't the only person walking around with that little plastic card full of numbers. And it takes two of them working together to launch a first strike. In the event of a retaliatory strike, if the U.S. is hit first, then yes, the president has the authority to launch a response. This bill in Congress is just pure political theater to try and keep selling the idea that Donald Trump is dangerous and Donald Trump should be allowed keys to the nuclear weapons. Now, down in Cuba, Raul Castro is saying they're ready to normalize relations with the United States. They want tourism. They want to be able to sell their rum and cigars to the United States. They can already sell them all everywhere else. This embargo was an exercise in stubbornness and pettiness on the part of the U.S. government. But Raul Castro is also reminding Trump administration that they must respect Cuba's independence. And that's not just bravado when you go back and you look at the history of Cuba and its relations with the United States of America, starting with the overthrow of Cuba's elected government and the imposition of the dictator Batista. It's part of that covert regime change policy. It's been going on all along, and that, of course, led to the Fidel Castro revolution, which is what led to that half-century embargo. And it really is time for it to end. Now, over in Israel, there's been an interesting development. As you know, the process that Israel goes through to steal Palestinian land is to go on in to an area they want and say they need to confiscate the land for military reasons. Now, under the Hague regulations, which are the international laws that govern occupation, and Israel is occupying Palestine, they are allowed to take temporary possession of land for military use. Here's where the problem comes on in. After Israel's military claims they're taking the land for military use, they'll then turn around and pass it into private hands for the development of these illegal settlements. And so now this one Palestinian town, Agruba, have filed a lawsuit saying that once the military need for that land is gone, under the Hague regulations, it must be returned to its rightful owners. Now, Israel's courts are not known for honesty and ethics and morals, and as of right now, the government of Israel has not fully replied to the petition and the lawsuit. I'm sure they're trying to figure some way they can wrangle around it, but the Palestinians are absolutely right. The international law that governs military occupation does allow Israel to commandeer land temporarily for military and security purposes. But once it's no longer being used for military or security purposes, it must go back to its original owners, not be handed over to some developer to build an illegal Israeli settlement. The law is on the side of the Palestinians. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Lucky in Arizona, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Mike. Great to talk with you. A couple things real quick. I was just kind of jokingly thinking the other day there was a better chance as far as Russia hacking the elections to probably hack them in favor of Hillary Clinton, given that she was so complacent with, selling them even private, citizens' private property for uranium deposits and stuff like that. I don't think anybody's thought about that. They'd have a better chance of hacking the election in her favor rather than Donald Trump, And also, I wanted to ask you, if you did have the chance to be in in the White House press corps or present there, what would you ask, the president?
Well, that would be hard to speculate because that would depend on the moment in time when I was given a White House press credential, because who knows what's going to be happening around that time. Obviously, if they're angling for invasion of Syria, I'd be asking about that, and so that's a very difficult question to answer right now. It's going to depend on what current events are going on at that time.
Sure, and I guess I was reading on your website, these safe zones that he wanted to set up there. It just seems like that would create kind of the it's a very volatile situation over there, and to do that, I think you're basically stepping on the Syrian government's feet, don't you think, and Russia as well?
Well, the U.S. has been doing that for 5 years. Syria never asked the United States to come into their country. Syria asked Russia to come on in and deal with these terrorist groups, and Russia has been very effective in doing that. And I think Trump would be well advised, if he intends to stick to his campaign promise of ending all of these foreign interventions, Trump would be well advised to coordinate with Russia and Syria and actually get those terrorist groups out. But the safe spaces idea does seem a little arrogant, and ultimately it's not going to work because it is those terrorists who deliberately mingle themselves with the civilians. The terrorists are not going to allow the civilians to leave for a safe space. Look, when they were trying to evacuate Aleppo, and the U.S.-backed terrorist groups were shooting any Syrian civilians who dared stick their head out a door.
Yes, that's terrible. I hope that, you know, with people like Tulsi Gabbard and the rest, you know, like-minded people, he'll start to realize, because I know you've been saying that he might be ignorant, you know, to what's really going on there because he's been relying on...
Naive is the word I chose to use.
Naive, yes, naive. But, all right, Michael, thanks. I just wanted to get your take on that. I appreciate it a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. So, following on with that phone call that we had a while back about how the U.S. government just wastes huge amounts of money on sometimes very ridiculous things, there's an article that came out of RINF.com, How to Really Reform Military Spending. Is Cutting Waste Enough? Well, cutting the waste would be a good start. Cutting out the number of middlemen who are involved in military procurement would be a big help. We're always hearing these stories about $20 bolts and $400 hammers and $1,000 toilet seats. The reason for that is because military procurement is this long chain of middlemen, each of whom are making profit on that device. And if that were to be thinned on out, where the Pentagon was simply directly purchasing what they need from the manufacturers instead of going through all these layers upon layers of contractors, that would definitely be a help. I would also get rid of what's called the cost-plus contract, in which the military contractors are financially incentivized to drive up the cost of the weapons because their profit is based on a percentage of that total cost. The more the weapon costs, the more the defense contractors are getting for it. So if you go to a system of, first of all, open competitive bidding and a flat fee to the defense contractors per item, then they're no longer being incentivized to try and find ways to jack up its cost. There's a lot of room in there to trim the defense budget. Definitely that. Now, turning to the world of economics here. Apparently the European Central Bank, which only a few months ago, the European Commission president was being chastised for accepting an advisory role with Goldman Sachs. And apparently now the European Union is investigating the close ties between European Central Bank President Mario Draghi and his aides have with various private banks around the world. Now, we'll talk about this when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy, and we're talking about how the EU Ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly, is now investigating the close ties between ECB President Mario Draghi and some of his aides with various private banks around the world. Now, of course, Draghi is saying they have to maintain a dialogue with external actors, but apparently there's been a complaint lodged by the non-governmental organization Corporate Europe Observatory, basically talking about Draghi's membership in this highly secretive organization called the Group of 30, which is this group of influential finance executives, academics, and policy makers that are apparently trying to set economic and banking policy around the world outside the view and control of the elected civil governments. Now, George Soros has accumulated much of his fortune by the practice of short selling. He seems to somehow magically know, or possibly may even be bringing about, a downturn in the price of certain stocks. In fact, one of the agendas that seems to be behind this huge global warming push was to suppress oil and coal stocks. Now, above a certain level, short sales have to be made public. But if you can break them up with a network of smaller companies, they can stay out of the eye. But apparently somebody over at Dutch Bank ING, somebody made a goof. And the AFM watchdog accidentally released George Soros short selling against the Dutch Bank ING. And, of course, he was also playing the same game against Germany's Deutsche Bank. And it's another reason why these derivatives need to be brought under some kind of control, because they're capable of causing a huge amount of damage. And they're very popular with the big stakes gamblers, but it was those derivatives that really turned that 2008 mortgage meltdown into an epic disaster. And they are unregulated, and they ought to be. And short selling is a form of derivatives. Now then, another company, Wet Seal, the Southern California-based teen apparel retailer, is on the brink of its second Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2 years. And this goes back to what I was saying yesterday about these new vending machines for Big Mac hamburgers. All American workers collectively are also collectively the customers of the retail companies, whether it's food, clothing, TV, car, whatever. And if you take away the Americans' jobs, don't act so confused and surprised when all of a sudden they're not buying your stuff at the stores anymore. And why our top economic leaders don't seem to get that remains a mystery. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And hello, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. We're talking about the economic news. And again, Donald Trump's biggest problem that he has to deal with is this horrible economic reality he's inherited from his predecessors, emphasis on the plural. And as I was saying before in reference to yet another retailer going into bankruptcy, all of America's workers collectively are also collectively America's customers. If you take away their jobs, either offshoring them or replacing them with automation, don't act shocked and surprised when all of a sudden you don't have people coming into your place of business to spend money. That's just inevitable that that's going to happen. And that's why I won't use the self-checkout over at Home Depot, or they just put one in at Sam's. I'm going to go to a human checker, because we have to keep Americans working. Real, legal Americans need jobs. Now, apparently, U.S. beef packers are having a rough year, including Tyson Foods, which is the largest U.S. meat processor, and Cargill. Their profits per head of cattle are in decline because of limiting supplies of animals and decreasing demand. And again, it's because people are having to buy whatever's cheapest in the markets. Now, there's another article over here about oil price meltdown. Is Trump setting the oil markets up for another bust? Well, they're being set up for a bust. I don't think it's got anything to do with Donald Trump. And apparently they're pointing at Donald Trump's signing of several orders which clearly favor the oil corporations moving forward on the Dakota pipeline, the Keystone pipeline, removing some restrictions on oil and gas drilling. And again, the job of president, you have to strike a balance. We do need the oil and gas at a good price. We just need to be careful about the public safety. And that certainly was an area that was being neglected under preceding administrations, in particular the fracking situation. All right, we have a caller on the line, Brendan in San Francisco. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I heard you reference you're a man trapped inside, you're a lesbian trapped inside a man's body.
Yeah.
I came across a great video. It says the title is "Trans Activists Are Wrong," And what it is this woman goes into heavy documentation from some of the leading transgender people, and they've come up with that it's a mental disorder. And one of the analogies for getting surgery for trannies is this doctor, well-respected, said that it's like giving liposuction to someone that's anorexic. You would never consider doing that. And it's such a great video it's called Feminism LOL, which I guess is Laugh Out Loud. I've watched a bunch of her videos. She's great. But you came to mind, and I was very sympathetic to your position, Mike, and I just want to let you know it's a mental disorder, brother.
Well, hang on. I have to draw the line there, okay? First of all, when I was saying that I'm a lesbian trapped in a man's body, it was meant as humor. And
I know.
Second of all, there's no absolute on what a mental disorder is. It's all arbitrary and usually geared to sell some kind of medication. And the reality is that, in my opinion, homosexuality is a necessary component of the long-term survival of the human race. And it's rather amazing to see all these people going around about population control, and not recognize that we have a built-in population control mechanism. Because if you go back through history and you look at times of increased social strife and hardship, you will find the per capita occurrence of homosexuality increases.
Right.
Okay, so homosexuals are not only a normal, natural part of the human condition, they are necessary for our survival. And so I'm absolutely opposed to anybody saying it's a mental disorder this or a mental disorder that. I mean, throughout history, they've declared all kinds of bizarre things mental disorder. Today, the Psychiatric Diagnostic Manual literally tries to declare every bit of normal human behavior is now suddenly a mental illness requiring medication. They've even declared the desire to eat safe, healthy food as a mental illness called orthorexia nervosa. I mean, that's how out of control it is. Anyway, thank you for your...
Mike, hold
Real
on.
Quick.
There was being specific to transgender because post-op, the suicide rates are like 20% above the average.
Yeah, and that really is a tragedy. And by the way, this use of surgery on these people, it's a great moneymaker. It's not a solution. It's like when you talk about Jenner, who supposedly went from being a man to a woman. Basically, he had cosmetic surgery because if you were to take a sample of his DNA, it's going to say he's a guy.
Yeah, too specific about transgender, and what's happening is they're actually gearing this towards kids now, and I'm very open to suggestion, but not specific to homosexuality. She was being particularly about transgender and transitioning, and that was the subject matter. But I was trying to put a humorous touch on it because.
Okay, well, I missed the humor here. I think we need to draw a line between simply encouraging acceptance of people who, by their genetic makeup, are in these various states of somewhere in between male and female. But I don't think that we should be out there marketing it as something desirable and acceptable to young people who are too young to really understand what's really being talked about. First of all, I reject the idea that there's any such a thing as an absolutely 100% pure male or a 100% pure female. There's always a little bit of blending in there. And one of the things I learned when I was with Mensa was that the higher your IQ is, the more you tend to have both male and female mental and emotional attitudes. And so it's a continuum. And some of the people in the middle of the continuum are getting very confused about it, whether that's coming from parental pressure or religious pressure or social pressure. And I encourage acceptance of these people. And again, they're part of the human race, whether you like it or not, no matter what your imaginary playmate in the sky may say otherwise. But I do think we should be very cautious about exposing young children to these things before they have a chance to figure out for themselves what their own sexual identities are, because you can really confuse kids.
the data simply just suggests that the surgery doesn't help improve their mental state with depression or whatever they're dealing with. It actually increases the harm. And the leading doctor who actually opened up one of the first surgery clinics, he shut it down after many years of saying this isn't helping these folks transition. And
yeah.
I was trying to put a light spin on it, but we're on the same page for
okay.
sure.
All right.
Real quick, Spicer needs to stop playing with the press and put them in the back row, because you're going to tie up this administration with these silly little dances. Spicer needs to get over with these guys and stop giving them airtime. Thanks, Mike.
Oh, thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and I agree on that last one here. I think what Spicer is doing is he's giving the corporate media enough rope to hang themselves on, because that's what they're in the process of doing. They're making themselves irrelevant. They're destroying their own credibility. They're in a panic now trying to figure out how they can get back to their business model of being paid huge sums of money to lie to the American people. Those days are pretty much gone, and they're not coming back anytime soon. And yes, they love to fight dirty against the independent media, but in the long run, there is no going back. What is happening today in our culture, because of the independent media and the Internet, has fundamentally transformed the flow of information through society as dramatically as when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing and books became affordable to the middle class. And the ruling powers of that day tried to reverse it, and they could not. Anyway, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Getting on back to the economic news here, article out of Constitution Club is saying it's time to talk about a return to constitutional money, because under the Constitution, the money is silver and gold or paper notes that are claim checks for that silver and gold. If you're my age, you remember when the paper money was stamped silver certificate, because that paper note was not the money, but you could walk into a bank and trade that paper note for the real money, the silver coinage. And this fiat money, the Federal Reserve note, which is not backed by anything except your future slave labor, is in fact the tool of those who would enslave us to artificially created and enhanced debt. Now, a lot of people are talking about what's going to happen with Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve. Is there going to be a battle with Yellen? Is Trump going to get on board the Audit the Fed bill? And we may be getting an indication, because Donald Trump is still redecorating the Oval Office. They tried to make a big deal over the fact that the bust of Winston Churchill was brought back. They tried to claim that he got rid of the bust of Martin Luther King. No, it's still there. And apparently now Donald Trump has hung a portrait of Andrew Jackson in the Oval Office. And a lot of people are dismissing it, saying, well, Jackson was a populist president, and maybe Trump is just looking at that. But there's a message there, because remember, Andrew Jackson devoted his second term in office to bringing down the second bank of the United States, which resulted in an immediate assassination attempt on him. And that may be sending a signal to the Federal Reserve that Donald Trump is not wholly on board with this idea of the 11th marble. And that would be a good thing. We need to break free of private central banking. It's not about banking, it's about enslavement. It's about ruling. Rule by compound interest. And it's no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, it only works as long as you allow yourself to be brainwashed into thinking this is the way life is supposed to be. Funny thing, when the Federal Reserve was created, the public schools stopped teaching about King George III's Currency Act as the primary cause of the American Revolution. Sure, they were worried the smart kids were going to stand up and say, wait a minute, we're now back in that exact same system. Now, as you know, there is a fight brewing over Obamacare, and there's already a proposed replacement for it. They're talking about getting rid of the individual mandate. But apparently, along with the Democrats, there is a block of Republicans in Congress that apparently are tied in too tight with these health insurance corporations. And there's now talk that there's going to be a campaign to stall the repeal and replacement of Obamacare by Congress. Everyone's talking about Donald Trump and where his money is, and that's a legitimate question to ask of any president, but I think it's time to extend it to members of Congress. I think members of Congress ought to agree to have their wealth placed in a blind trust before taking office. Now then, getting on to immigration and so forth. Over in Great Britain, London's metro system, the Tube, is all of a sudden being taken over by these guerrilla advertisements that are part of a campaign to draw attention to mass deportations about to be carried out by the British government, as if this was a bad thing. Now, I don't know who's paying for all of this. It could be one of Soros' NGOs, because he wants open borders. That's why he calls it the Open Society Foundation, a one world government. Now, the European Union is now admitting that its much lauded new border control agency is failing miserably. Despite placing 100,000 guards all over Europe's external borders, the refugees are still streaming in. So Europe needs to do exactly the same thing that the United States needs to do. Cut off the financial incentive for them to come. Make sure they cannot be allowed to work. No free handouts of any kind. Certainly some of the stuff they were doing up in Sweden, like kicking people out of their homes to give the homes to migrants, that has to stop. Now, Donald Trump has ordered the Department of Homeland Security to publish weekly lists of crimes committed in the United States of America by illegal immigrants and refugees, trying to crack down on the sanctuary cities and all these low-level politicians and liberals who are saying, I refuse to accept the law of the land. Remember, the whole point of a sanctuary city is they're already in defiance of existing U.S. law. And now we get down to the situation with Mexico and the much-hyped wall, which is more symbolism than anything else here. The president of Mexico has now canceled his planned trip to the U.S. over this border wall spat with Donald Trump. Enrique Peña Nieto has canceled his trip to Washington following Trump's order to begin building the wall. Well, why would the president of Mexico be all that concerned? Well, there's a story that came out over in IntelliHub on how the Mexican president's rise to political power was funded by the Juarez drug cartel. And that is a major reason he's against enforcing the border between Mexico and the United States, because then he'd have all those American drug customers cut off. The caller was right. Mexico's government is corrupted. And previous administrations helped that along. Remember Fast and Furious? The same Obama administration that was demanding we law-abiding American citizens give up our weapons was providing military-style weapons to the Sinaloa cartel at taxpayer expense. And some of those weapons came back into the United States of America and were used to commit crimes. We know the CIA has had cozy relations with drug smugglers for decades. They were bringing Kunsa's heroin into the United States during Vietnam. They were trafficking cocaine during Operation Screwworm out of Arkansas in the 1980s. That's why a lot of people call CIA stands for Cocaine Importation Agency. Now, Donald Trump has responded to the president of Mexico's canceling of the trip by saying that they're going to cancel upcoming trade negotiations with Mexico. They're just going to be cut off. There's going to be no trade between Mexico and the United States, which unfortunately contradicts with Trump's announced plan of putting a 20% tariff on Mexican imports to pay for that wall. So we'll see what comes on out of that. Meanwhile, the chief of the Border Patrol, Mark Morgan, has resigned, was considered a disgrace by his fellow officials in the Border Patrol. And it's another case of the swamp starting to drain itself. Maybe he just didn't want to wait to be fired. And, of course, he was fully on board with this open borders policy from the Obama administration. Out in Los Angeles, the immigrants there, illegal immigrants, let's have a reminder, we're talking about the illegal immigrants, not the legal ones. They're having a freak bout over Donald Trump's executive orders. And you need to understand, in Los Angeles County, all by itself, they have 10% of all the illegal immigrants in the United States of America. And that's why they're freaking out. Now, California can't afford to support this huge population. And that is really the problem. Our economy is already weak and fragile. It doesn't need the additional load of illegal immigrants and refugees being brought in and given all kinds of free stuff. During the Obama administration, the illegal immigrants were getting a better treatment from the U.S. government than legal citizens were. I want to take a break. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're still talking about the immigration situation. Apparently, over in New York City, there was an emergency protest in support of Muslim immigration and open borders. Now, I want to be very clear about this again. There is a legal process by which anybody can come to this country and become a U.S. citizen. And along the way, of course, you'll be checked out to make sure you're not a criminal, you're not a terrorist, you're not carrying contagious diseases, which is just common sense. And for those who have come to this country through the legal immigration process, welcome. And I hope it's not too big a disappointment to you. But when discussing illegal immigrants, remember that first word. And I'm still getting emails from everybody saying, oh, you're just being a racist. You know, oh, I'm sorry, illegal is not a race. I have a lot of people writing in and say, well, your name is Rivero, you're Hispanic, did you come across the border? Actually, Rivero is a Sephardic name, and I was born in Boston. Speaking of which, the mayor of Boston is defying Trump's immigration orders, and he's going to house illegals in City Hall, which, by the way, he does not own. That's the property of the taxpayer. And by so doing, the Boston mayor has just broken U.S. Code 8, Section 1324, along with a bunch of the subsections. It is against the law to harbor illegal immigrants. It is against the law to give them employment. If we start enforcing those laws, a big part of the illegal immigrant program is going to go away. But when we have all these people coming to the border saying, Obama said I could come on in, we're going to get free cheese, and we're going to get free this, and we're going to get free that, and we're going to have cars, and they're guaranteeing us jobs, and then they get a plane flight to someplace in the hinterland to make it harder to track them down. Remember, Eisenhower's Operation Wetback effectively closed down the border to Mexico with only 10% of the current staffing of immigration and customs enforcement. If Eisenhower can do it, so can Donald Trump. Now, Theresa May is visiting here in the United States. She was giving a speech earlier today. It was carried on Fox News. And she is drawing a line of equivalence between Brexit and Donald Trump's victory, in that both represent the resurgence of national sovereignty in the face of globalism. And Theresa is saying that she will be openly telling Trump when she doesn't agree with him, which is fine. That's what we're all supposed to be doing. But Theresa is facing that uphill fight because Britain's highest court ruled Parliament does have a say on Title 50, and it looks like Parliament is going to vote it down, and they could trigger a civil war with that. Because you're going to have all those British subjects realizing that they are subjects and that the government is not listening to them. Now, maybe they'll just come up with a new Magna Carta, or maybe they'll remember that that big blood-stained wooden block is still there at the Tower of London. But that whole refugee situation is getting out of control. Meanwhile, over in Greece, the employers' union is predicting Greece will quit the European Union. There's going to be a Grexit because Tsipras has failed to improve the economy because of all of that manufactured debt to the IMF, the World Bank, and the European Central Bank. No matter how hard everybody works, they cannot pay that debt down. And much of that debt was created through fraud by Greece's own government under Papandreou. And the attitude of the money junkies is, we don't care how the debt was created. Debt is holy. Debt is sacrosanct. You will sacrifice your life and that of your children to servicing this debt in perpetuity. Because that's what private central banking is, a means of enslaving nations and people to this imagined obligation of debt. Something most people don't realize when they talk about all this interest that's owed on loans, they're talking about money that has never existed. It's a bookkeeping entry only. And private central banking is a trap because the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, is loaned into circulation, more money is owed that central bank than actually exists. That is the trap. That is the means of enslavement. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, down in Texas, in Dallas, there was this teacher, Sandy Doan, who apparently had decided she was going to have an affair with one of her students. And the student turned around and blackmailed her over it. And apparently this teacher paid about $28,000 to the student to keep him from telling police. And apparently the word got out about what was going on. She was arrested last Friday. Now, I'm looking at all these bizarre stories. And I want to get back to this issue about prescription antidepressants, because I think the effects go way beyond suicide and mass murder into areas where people aren't really looking at this stuff. Now, we did a little correlation here. We took the chart of per capita consumption of prescription antidepressants, and we overlaid it with the chart of the per capita increase in domestic violence incidents, and we got a strong correlation. Now, we know these antidepressants, one of the things they do is they result in poor impulse control, where you'll just sort of go on what your first feeling at the moment is, whether it's suicide or grabbing a student or so forth and so on. So I want to know if this teacher was on prescription antidepressants, because I think there's a major, major problem out there that nobody is really looking at. Because it makes money, and as long as it makes money, it's good, and we don't ever question anything that makes money. Now, over at Oxfam, which is the fourth biggest fundraiser in Great Britain, they have lost more than £500,000 to fraud and corruption, according to its annual report. And it's also dealing with the problem of sex assaults and exploitation among its workforce. And you start to wonder if all of these charities, if they're all as dirty as the Clinton Foundation was. There needs to be a little bit more oversight, and that is supposed to be the function of the government, but they're too busy out there pushing their own nonsense. Now, over in Chicago, last night they were having a memorial for a victim of an act of gun violence. And apparently, at this memorial, there was another shooting, which resulted in 6 people, including a 12-year-old girl, getting shot. This in a city that is held up by the gun grabbers as the model for gun control for the entire nation. Because it is. All the law-abiding citizens, the innocent, are completely disarmed and helpless. And only the criminals have the guns. It's like a giant open-air shooting gallery where the bad guys can go crazy knowing that nobody can shoot back at them. Now, I don't know if President Trump really has the authority to order anything other than the National Guard into Chicago, but something has to be done. And it is very, very clear that restrictive gun laws are only limiting the law-abiding citizen. And they're not stopping the crime whatsoever. Now, on yesterday's show, we had somebody calling on in asking about this issue that if you report an illegal action by your employer, can you be sued under your non-disclosure agreement? So I posted this article that we found over at mlacqua.com, basically asking, is it violating your non-disclosure agreement if your employer is committing an illegal act? And the response to that was, you need to make sure it really is illegal, but if it is actually illegal and there's no question about it, then yes, you can report that and you cannot be sued under your NDA. But if you report a suspicion and it turns out to be false, then yes, you can be sued under the non-disclosure agreement. So you have to be very, very, very careful. Now, police in Norfolk are warning about a new scam that is out there where people are being called, and the caller, first of all, probably in violation of the do not call list anyway, and they talk about themselves and their business, and then they'll ask, can you hear me? And you'll say, yes. Yes, I can. Yes, of course. And what's going on is apparently the scammers are recording you when you say yes, and then use it to sign you up for a product or service you never asked for. So if somebody cold calls, and first of all, when I get a telemarketing call, I hang up anyway. All my phone numbers are on the do not call list. I do not want these calls. I got one the other day where the lady started calling and calling, talking and talking, wouldn't let me come in with a question about what was going on. I hung up on her. And that's what we should all be doing. Just hang up on these people. Because if it isn't a scam, it's probably something you either don't want, don't need, or can't afford anyway. Now, last week it came on out that Planned Parenthood, in contradiction to their name, does not offer any planning other than abortion. They do not provide prenatal care or even references to prenatal care. If you're trying to plan and decide what you're going to do as a parent and you go there, they're only interested in you if you are planning an abortion from which they can make money. If you want to actually have your baby, they don't even, they show you the door. Well, a little bit of good news on that one, because apparently Planned Parenthood has been referred for criminal prosecution to the Department of Justice by the Senate Judiciary Committee over this practice of selling body parts of aborted children for profit. So finally there. So let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. Sioux City experienced, actually set a daily snow record on Tuesday. Record-breaking snowfall up there. Apparently over in Iowa, they're still dealing with trying to clean it all up. A lot of these cities are inadequately prepared for a hard winter, because what have they been hearing ever since the 1990s? Oh, the world is warming. Snowfalls are a thing of the past. And so all of these governments are saying, well, we don't need to have as many snowplows. We don't need to stockpile as much road grit or salt or any of this other stuff. And they're coming up short. We reported yesterday on this one city has already gone through its entire budget for snow removal for the winter. And winter's just really getting started. The Minnesota Department of Transportation are having to work extra hard, keeping the roads safe and open. One of the most ridiculous things that's out there is that one of the really liberal cities decided that they were going to feminize snow removal. And they declared it the priority of the snow removal crews to clean the sidewalks rather than the main streets, because women are more likely to be using the sidewalks than driving, and therefore they should be given the priority. What was the result? All kinds of traffic accidents. I'm sure all the body shops in that town are just celebrating and popping champagne corks. Over in Yankton, heavy snow there. They're advising no travel for much of southeast South Dakota and northwest Nebraska. They're saying stay in your homes, don't go to school, don't go to work. Over in France, they've had so much snow and ice, their resources are stretched to the limit. And they're talking now about rolling power blackouts in order to keep everybody serviced. And I'm sure that all of those refugees in France are part of the strain on the public utilities. Now, we had a caller call into the show yesterday asking about being able to buy a new computer and put an older operating system on it. And I said, it may not be possible. And so over in Softpedia, there was this article where Microsoft has announced that all of the new Intel CPUs, codenamed Skylake, will only run Windows 10. They're designed to work with Windows 10, and they won't allow you to use any older operating systems at all. Now, I note within this article that it's only the Intel chips. They're not talking about anything by AMD. So you may need to look at that. And again, if you build your own white box, you're past that roadblock. I think one of the reasons Windows 10 has not done all that well was the very heavy-handed, almost fascist tyranny shown by Microsoft. You will accept a new website. You will pay monthly license fees. You will buy all new software to run on Windows 10 because it won't run on your older applications won't run. And it's all now on a rental basis. Everybody's moving away from perpetual licenses to renting your software month to month to month to month to month. Another reason to go to Linux. Now, apparently, more malware has crept into Google Play. This is ransomware disguised as a battery monitoring application, made its way into the Google Play Store. It's called, the malware is called Charger, and it's a battery monitoring tool called Energy Rescue, which has already been removed from the Google Play. But if you got this, then you have already got this ransomware. So, let's see. More ransomware there. Now then, there is a fake Netflix application that is making its way around the net. Now, Netflix, of course, is a very powerful platform. They've got 44 million subscribers in 41 countries. And so the embedded apps are very, very popular. They're highly in demand. But you should only download it from Netflix itself. Make sure it's official. If you find it on some other blog, it could be the fake one. This device, this malware, this fake Netflix application gives total strangers access to your phone's camera, microphone, and messages. They could conceivably be spying on you in the privacy of your own home and listening to your conversations. And it was discovered by cybersecurity experts Zscaler. And they're saying it's a well-crafted piece of spyware, and they're calling it SpyNote RAT. RAT, of course, being an acronym for Remote Access Tool. Now, the VeerLocker ransomware is back, but apparently can be defeated. And apparently there is a mistake in the code where if you just need to enter any 64 length string, like 64 zeros, in the text box of the lock screen note, and the malware will believe that it's been paid, and the note will disappear. But there's a problem. What this does, in addition to encrypting all of your files, is it wraps them in an executable wrapper and then hides the .exe extension. And so if you are applying for a job and you take what you think is your resume Word file that ends in .doc and you attach it to the email and you send it to your prospective employer and they click open the document to read it, the malware gets planted on their machines. And I can guarantee you at that point you will not get a job with those people. So where is the NSA in all of this? Damage and destruction, economic harm, literally threats to human life when ransomware attacks hospitals. Are they just this huge waste of time and money that doesn't do anything like so many government programs? Trump wants to balance the budget. Shutting down the NSA might be a good place to start, or at least scaling it back and telling them, look, you only look at the people we know are bad people, and you leave the other 300 million Americans alone, because that's what the Fourth Amendment says you are supposed to do. Now, apparently, about a year ago, there was a company that ran a successful crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo, and they got $1 million from wealthy investors to develop a smartphone breathalyzer. This was a little gizmo that would slide into the USB port of your smartphone, and it was billed as a law enforcement grade breathalyzer to make sure that you weren't too inebriated to drive. But apparently the Federal Trade Commission has come on down on them, saying the breathometer is inaccurate and deceptive. It's so inaccurate that the FTC has now shut them down. We seem to be living in the age of the scam, or the age of the poor quality product. Hewlett-Packard has recalled 101,000 laptop batteries out of fears that they could explode. Now, getting on to the issue of vaccines, and I'm wishing Robert Kennedy a lot of luck. And again, Robert Kennedy Jr. has not said removing mercury from vaccines will make them safe. All he said is they're part of the problem. And apparently, Mike Adams, the health ranger, literally came on out and dared scientists, the pro-vaccine group, go ahead and drink mercury to prove it's safe to inject into children. And, of course, they're going to turn him down. Remember when that spokesperson for Monsanto was offered a glass, he was out there saying, glyphosate is perfectly safe, couldn't hurt you. And somebody offered him a glass of glyphosate and said, prove it, just drink it down right now. And he said, I'm not crazy, and he left the stage. They know what's going on. Now, there's a new documentary out, and it goes back to something that happened in the 1970s. And I'm very sensitive to this issue because it was during the same period of time my mother was succumbing to cancer, and I'm still not sure if she died of the cancer or of the cancer treatment because they had her chemotherapy and radiated, and it was just horrible to watch it happen. And at the same time, there was word about a new cancer treatment called Laetrile. And New York's Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center was ground zero for that firestorm. But apparently, according to this documentary, Laetrile was found to actually be effective, but it was a threat to the more expensive and profitable cancer treatments out there, and so it was basically suppressed. We saw the same thing going on with hydrazine sulfate. It's all about the profit and the money. It's not about your health. Down in Mexico, the Colima volcano near Mexico City has started erupting. Residents are being told to literally cover themselves with water-soaked cloth to protect themselves as a precaution. It's apparently a major eruption. And there does seem to be a lot of volcanic activity going on all around the earth. Bogoslav and Takawanga in the Aleutians, Shevuluk, Kuchevskov and Abeco in Kamchatka Peninsula, Pacaya in Guatemala, Masaya in Nicaragua, on and on, Sabancaya in Peru, and of course, we're having an increased eruption right here in Hawaii down on Kilauea. So there's a lot going on there deep inside planet Earth. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with our last segment after these few words. And hello, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And interesting little story. I saw this actually on TV. Europe has opened what appears to be the first underwater art museum. And it's in Spain. It's out by the Canary Islands. And you obviously have to put on skin diving outfit. And it is currently populated by 200 life-sized human figures created over 2 years by British sculptor Jason DeCaires Taylor, which strikes me as possibly sparking a trend of underwater art. Now, obviously, here in Hawaii, we have a lot of tourism and a lot of underwater activity, which is mostly focused on sunken ships, artificial reefs, and various other things. But actually deliberately created to be submerged artwork, I think that might actually turn out to be something that is going to catch on and will help boost tourism. Now, up in Canada, unfortunately, that scandal over the residential school system is not going away. Apparently, at the former Mohawk Institute Indian Residential School, there was an authorized archaeological excavation. that is already finding the remains of children. And apparently some of the bones were broken, indicating that these victims had suffered grievous injury prior to death. And it's a horrible, horrible scandal. And it is kind of ugly what humans are capable of when they think they're acting at the will of some higher being or higher principle. Now, we've been talking about GMOs, and we've been talking about this new pink pineapple, which is going to be hitting the stores here in the near future. The pink color is created through genetic manipulation, and the FDA has declared the GM pink pineapple perfectly safe. Where did they base that assessment? On the manufacturer's own report. The creator of the pink pineapple said, here, we think this is safe, and the FDA said, oh yes, we agree, sell that thing. No way am I going to touch a pink pineapple. I mean, we're already learning that Monsanto engaged in some underhanded biased spin and reporting on their so-called safety test for glyphosate. Now, this is getting a little bit scary over here. Story coming out of the BBC. Apparently, scientists are playing around with a new form of DNA. Now, normal DNA found in nature has 4 letters, A, T, C, and G, which make that DNA double helix. But this organism they've created in a laboratory uses an additional 2, giving it a genetic code of 6 letters, which is probably going to make it more efficient. And researchers are hoping this is going to lead to germs that will manufacture new classes of drugs. What could possibly go wrong with that? All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Thank you for spending time with us today. We're going to be back tomorrow, Friday, with the lovely Lady Claire, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Share what you know with everyone you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.